Every living being is destined to leave this earth at some point. In 1996, when I was in despair, I tried to find an answer to the question of what really happened to those I loved and mourned so much. At that time, I studied a large number of books on the afterlife. I was interested in those books that dealt with the phenomenon of electronic voices. I found them so unusual and striking that I didn't know what to think, says Dr. Anabela Cardoso, recalling one of the most difficult periods of her life. When Anabela Cardoso experienced the loss of her dead brother, she thought for the first time about what happens to a person when their earthly life comes to an end. Anabela Cardoso began to seek comfort and hope in books. In one of them, The Bridge Between Worlds by Hildegard Schaefer, she learned that everyone is able to contact the other world and communicate with the soul of a deceased loved one. All you need is a tape recorder and a blank cassette. In 1997, Anabela Cardoso began to experiment with a small group of people. Among them were the parents of a young man who had drowned at sea in a storm. We tried to get the answers on tape. We put a blank cassette into a tape recorder and turned it on. Then we would ask questions, address them to our deceased relatives, and then wait in silence for a minute or two. After recording, we would rewind the tape and listen to it from the beginning. During the recording, we used the white noise coming from a radio set tuned to short and medium waves as a background sound. Anabela Cardoso describes her experiments. 2 months have passed since the beginning of the first experiment, but the group has not managed to receive a single message from the other side. The first one was recorded at the beginning of 1998. It contained only one name, Bellina. This was the name Anabela Cardoso was called by her relatives as a child. After that, the messages received on magnetic tape became a regular occurrence. Anabela Cardoso had 3 or 4 sessions a week. Sometimes, at Anabela's request, her otherworldly interlocutors would give their names. More often than not, they were the names of strangers. But among the accepted voices were those who introduced themselves as Anabela's grandmother, brother, and father. During these sessions, Anabela Cardoso asked the inhabitants of the other world a variety of questions. These questions were about life on Earth and about the world with which she had made contact. Later, Anabela Cardoso summarized the messages she received. And this is what came out. From the messages she received, Anabela Cardoso learned that the continuation of life after death is a natural law of nature. This law works for every person, regardless of their ethical and religious beliefs. Also, one of the messages Anabela received said that at the time of departure from the earth is predetermined for every living being. Anabela was also interested in the question of why people go through suffering in their earthly lives. In response, the following messages were received: all beings in the world experience suffering, plants also suffer, there is a purpose to all suffering. It is important for spiritual growth, it would be good if people made love the panacea of the world. Will there be suffering in the other world? According to the messages received, this world is beautiful and just for all beings, it also has its own laws for everything. The most important thing in her world is truth. Anabela also learnt from the received messages that people who are prone to anger in earthly life live separately. In the received messages, there are also sparse descriptions of another world. It is similar to ours, but much more beautiful. The inhabitants of this world have no concept of time, they have a different space. The bodies of the inhabitants of the other world are similar to ours, material bodies. At the same time, they are much more beautiful than when they lived on Earth. According to the descriptions received, the inhabitants of the other world live in renewed, youthful and full bodies, are endowed with the ability to travel by the power of thought, and often visit Earth. According to them, they modulate radio waves with their thoughts, which requires a great deal of patience and concentration. In fact, it is their thoughts that become audible after being transformed into radio waves. The inhabitants of the other world have amazing abilities. For example, they can travel by thought and be in two places at once with full consciousness. However, according to Anabela Cardoso, the purpose of her experiments is not to find out what life is like on the other side. The process of receiving these messages is not an easy task. It requires hours, perseverance, and patience. But the investment is undoubtedly worth it, because you discover the true miracle of life, penetrating its incredible vastness, endless and never inexhaustible, says Anabela Cardoso.